Let's discuss how Coach Derek Laxdal used the last training session of rookie camp to get some of our prospects ready for main camp that starts tomorrow.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. How we're going to start off today's episode is by talking a little bit about what Derek Laxdal and his philosophy is. And it goes into something that we talked about earlier this week. My name, for those who are meeting and seeing me for the first time, Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken. I am also a writer at CBSSports.com. Was just checking out the Seattle Storm game. It was a good competition, but ultimately the Las Vegas Aces pulled away. Those two probably going to meet in the first round anyway. You can find my work over at CBSSports.com. You can also find my work at Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. I am really becoming a fan of Coach Derek. He's going to be our new Coachella Valley coach, and I just really like his philosophy. I mentioned it a few episodes ago, but he seems like he's business, no nonsense. He's clear with his communication, certainly with media. I can only assume that he's clear with his communication with the young guys that he has been coaching and training. And I mentioned that one of the things that I liked about how the Seattle Kraken set up a rookie camp this year is that they participated in the rookie face-off. Now, Derek Laxdal also talked about why this was something that he felt was important for the team. So I want to take you over to what Coach Derek said yesterday. He was talking after the final session with only the rookies. So, this was, an opportunity for us to hear from him regarding, just what he is expecting and what he was preparing the young prospects for as they go into training camp. And this goes into something that I've talked about with Tad O'Had, who is the general manager and head coach of the Kansas City Mavericks. I've talked to Dan Bilesma and Jessica Campbell about this when they were with the Firebirds. And I love to see that Derek is incorporating that as well. This shouldn't be a surprise because all the coaches that I've mentioned, I haven't spoken directly with Derek yet, but Jessica and Dan and Tad, they've been telling me that there is integration from the NHL to the AHL to the ECHL. And this camp, especially as we get all of the senior, elder statesmen on the ice, we're really going to see that start to pay dividends. That's, I don't know if I want to call it a bold prediction, but it stands to reason that the more that our pipeline is integrated, the more communication there is among the coaching staff, the more that we're integrating the just even kind of the even as we're integrating, the systems, that should pay dividends when it comes to performance on the ice, because you're not learning another thing. You're not learning another system, another scheme, another defensive setup. If anything, you're just getting that chemistry. And so I'm really hoping that this pays dividends, but there's some things intentionally already that we see Derek Laxdal doing. Now, I can't speak to exactly whether these were things that were done intentionally or not under, Dave Haxtell. I can tell you that the way they're communicated, clear, concise, and quite honestly, just really transparently, it's exciting. And it also makes it a little bit easier to analyze where I think the team is going to be. Sometimes when you get vague answers from players or coaches, it makes it a little bit more difficult to assess what's really happening. And I felt that way about the Seattle Kraken at times under Coach Dave Haxtell. I just wonder if this style of communication is going to change, quite honestly, how we're able to assess as the journalists, as the fans of the Kraken, what's really working. But as you can tell, I can geek out about this. Those who are everydayers and OGers know that I love the concept of leadership development. I know that Jessica Campbell and Dan Bilesman, I'm getting the sense that, Laxdal has this as well. That they understand and appreciate the different approaches to getting the best out of tried and true leaders or emerging leaders. So it's pretty exciting. But let me take you over to Derek Laxdal. He's going to be talking. This is from the Tuesday sessions on ice. On Wednesday, the Seattle Kraken are having a media day. That's kind of an internal media day. And then on Thursday, we'll hit the ice with everyone, rookies, prospects, and of course, those we know are coming back to the Kraken. So let's get you over to Derek Laxdal.
The theme of today's practice was just setting up the kids for Thursday's first practice. So when they're going in and executing the drills that the team's going to run through the first 3 days, then there shouldn't be any. The execution should be high for these kids. They'll be familiar with the drills, so they should have less nerves going through the practice. Well, there's a couple things. There's one called Own the Lanes. That was the first one when the puck goes to the wall. That's all about compete, puck protection, just, trying to get that energy level up. And the last drill that you saw, we call the Dixie Don't Quit. So we used to do that in Oshawa. It's a drill that we devised. It has a lot of skill components into it. Puck protection, angling, battling, compete, second efforts. And then they get a cookie at the end. If they get through the gate, they get a breakaway. And then now they have to shoot under exhaustion. So it forces them to train their muscles to, if you're in a shift and you're going for, 45, 50 seconds, and all of a sudden the puck bounces on your stick, you got to be able to finish it. So I love that drill. I think it's a great drill, and it's something that we'll use going forward in CV. It was good. If you look at some of the guys who've been through a year in CV in the American Hockey League, it's incredible how they've matured and developed. Logan Morrison, Melanson, those guys just taking a step in their game. And so at the end of the day, it's hard for them because they're probably already focused on May camp, but they got to get through the games. But it's the young kids coming through, the 18-year-olds and the 19-year-olds. They're trying to survive those games. And now that they've survived them, they're going to feel better about themselves. The veteran guys, it's more about just getting their feet wet again, getting into that game groove, and getting them set up for training camp. Ferks, yeah. You know what? I thought he really took a huge step from his second game from his first game. When you're a high scorer like that, you have a lot of defensive deficiencies. And that's one thing we're going to have to correct with some of these players is going forward is for these players to play in the National Hockey League, to get a chance to play, they have to be able to survive defensively in the game. We know the offense is going to be there. So I thought as the two games went along for Jagger, he paid attention to some of the little structure details of his game defensively and allowed him to be a little bit more successfully offensively. We used him on the penalty kill. So those are some of the areas that it's going to be a learning experience for these kids. For any high-end player, David Goyette's a great example coming out of OHL. He's a high-end scorer, and we're going to have to, incorporate some defensive structure into his game to allow him to survive, to get those chances to go on the offense. If you're 5-1 in the first 6 games, you're just kind of sneaking out wins, the analytics aren't going to lie. Maybe your denials are low, So what you're trying to do is get your analytics to match your results. Sometimes they're skewed a little bit because you're just sneaking out wins. So that's there's good information for the coaches where we can go back and look at the video and say why are we seeing this in the analytics? Well, here's the video, and it allows us to set up our practices.
So, there were a lot of really great nuggets there. You saw that at the end of the clip. I kept something that, we heard Derek talking about Jagger, and that when you are such a high-end offensive player, there are defensive deficiencies. You know, if you're an everydayer or an OGer, that I absolutely love that he's talking about putting and integrating things in through communication, through different drills. He walked us through a few drills, which I freaking love, because it also hits on what I've been saying again for about a year and a half, that we got to get the training, like the open up the lungs, get the legs active. And it seems like he's been able to do that. I can't wait to get to training camp on Thursday. But I love it. I love the philosophy. Everything seems very meticulous, calculated, in a good way, like planned out and thoughtful, and how things are going to roll into things. Derek just seems like he is hitting the ground running. I also loved what he said about analytics, and that sometimes, yes, you do try to get the analytics to match what you're seeing, but also the analytics can be at least somewhat anecdotal, or they can help you prescribe, even when you're getting wins, perhaps what isn't working the way you want it to work. So these are all things that I cannot wait to talk to the coaching staffs about. I get very bullish about the eye test, but I understand the analytics, and I'm curious how these coaching staffs at Coachella Valley and of course at the Seattle Kraken are going to continue to push the envelope when it comes to what you're seeing on video, what you're seeing live in games, what you're seeing in practice versus how the analytics are showing up and what the right balance is. But I love that Derek says that you look at the film, you look at the analytics, you have the conversations. I'm kind of pulling that from what he's been saying. And that's how he organizes practice. Oh, we talking about practice. That's right. Derek likes to talk about practice. So I love that. Coming up, let's talk about not Brooks and Dunn, but Larson and Dunn. Some of you country fans know what I'm talking about. We'll talk about Adam Larson, Vince Dunn, and the Blue Line coming up next on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken, once again brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You hear us talk about FanDuel a lot because it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. That's coming up close here. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're looking for a $5 bet to put down, take a look at the futures bets. Do you agree with FanDuel and a lot of the other experts that the Seattle Kraken probably going to come out 5th overall in the Pacific Division? Put your money down, but always put it down and gamble responsibly over at FanDuel. Once again, America's #1 sportsbook and our #1 sportsbook here at Locked On Kraken. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here. We just went over the strategy, the intentionality of rookie camp, specifically their last ice session, as we go into full camp on Thursday. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. We just heard from Derek Laxdal. He's going to be our new head coach of the Coachella Valley Firebirds. Philosophy, what conversations he's seeing or having with some of the young players, things that he wants to see from some of the high octane players like Jagger. He also talked about Edward Shala and talked about how with a player like Shala and others, you're not necessarily going to look at the box score and be like, that's success, that's failure. He talked about meeting the mark with a player like Shala as an example. He was asked about Shala and saying, I asked Shala to do these things. When I saw him in the game, he was doing these things from that list. And the ability to translate what you're hearing in film sessions, what you're hearing in training sessions, and to apply that to the ice, that's what he's wanting to see and what he's getting from some of the young players. We also heard him talk And we heard Ron Francis talk about how Shane Wright is really stepping up in leadership. He's someone I'm really excited to talk about, or to talk to and about, in the next handful of days, because I've been saying it for weeks now, for months maybe. He's chomping at the bit. He wants his chance, and I think he knows it's go time. So that's exciting for us. But again, we're not going to talk about Boot, Scoot, and Boogie, Brooks, and Dunn, but we are going to talk about Larson and Dunn on this segment of Locked On Kraken. I have some issues with just how defense is rated in any sport in the universe, but especially let's talk about the Kraken defense. I know I just talked about analytics and how Derek is going to use analytics to instruct practice for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, but I also think that the philosophy around extending Vince Dunn, extending Adam Larsson, kind of gives us a little bit of a peek into the future of what the Seattle Kraken are thinking. And we know we signed that extension with Vince last season. We signed an extension that will kick in starting next year with Adam Larsson this year. And in addition to just a hilarious little bit where Vince Dunn kind of quote unquote broke the news on social media. These two have grown up a lot together. And I first want to take you to a clip from Ron Francis talking about the impact of having Larson and Dunn as a duo on the blue line.
Yeah, I don't know, just this sort of, I think Vince, when he first got here, was kind of finding his way a little bit. And Lars, had some tough situations maybe in his background, and this was a fresh start for him, and they just kind of meshed and went well together. And I think both of them have been a real solid pair for us all 3 seasons, and I don't expect that to change moving forward. Yeah, certainly he would be in the mix. I mean, I think in fairness to Dan, he hasn't even had a practice yet, so we need to give him a few weeks here just to see what he feels we have in the locker room and on the ice, and if he's comfortable naming somebody captain at the end, then we'll do that before we head into the season.
So that was our fearless leader, Ron Francis. Yes, I know I'm I'm starting to get close to maybe sort of kind of being on the fence regarding Ron Francis, but and the front office overall, I don't like some of the things that they've done, but having Vince Dunn with Adam Larsson has been a bright spot. The one thing that I ask as a question that I think we still need to unearth the answer to is, if Larson and Dunn is our best combo defensively, does that mean that we're a good defensive team? And they're good for us, and that is critically important. And when we look at the landscape, I think this is the job of a front office. When you look at the landscape, how do you measure up against other defensive ends? Or blue lines, I guess is the better way of saying that. How do you measure up against other blue lines? And I do think that's why we brought in Brandon Montour. I hear great things about Brandon. I know some of you said, I'm not so sure about Chandler Stevenson in leadership. We saw YouTube comments for our Locked On Kraken insiders via subtext, but you really like Brandon Montour. I was just catching up with Charles from Circling Seattle Sports at a Seattle Storm game, said the same thing. Seems like a stand-up guy. Love to hear it. So I think he fits into the philosophy and the culture of the Seattle Kraken. But remember, we had Armando Velez on from Locked On Florida Panthers, and he also told us Brandon Montour can absolutely skate. So I guess one of the questions that I have coming into training camp that will start on Thursday, and something that I'm going to be looking out for, is, are we going to keep Larson and Dunn together? I keep hearing Boot, Scoot, and Boogie in my head as I say Larson and Dunn. It's hilarious. Anyway, if you don't know that song, take a look it up. I went to school in North Carolina, and I live in Tulsa now. Of course, I know a little bit about 90s country. I think it's the heyday in my personal opinion, but anyway, I digress. So are we going to have Larson and Dunn? Where does Montour fit in? Brian Dumoulin, I got a little bit more comfortable with him last year, but that right off the gate, and I should have trusted my instincts maybe, but I just wasn't necessarily seeing nothing against the guy, but I didn't think that his level of play as a defenseman was going to be dynamic enough for the way and the trajectory that I think we have and that we need, quite honestly, for the Seattle Kraken. So that's going to be interesting. But before we separate Larson and Dunn, let's hear from Big Cat himself about returning to the Seattle Kraken. And yes, a little bit about Vince Dunn breaking the news on social media.
I think for myself personally, it's been 3 fun years here in Seattle. Just seeing how much the city and the fans and everyone around the city loves the team, and that was something I really wanted to see a lot more of, and I will now moving forward after this. So yeah, no, it's something we're really excited about. We kind of started talking a little bit this summer, and then it kind of went pretty quick after that. So even before we started talking, this was kind of where my mind was at, and I'm really glad and excited we got it done. I told him, take it down. Now we both are gonna stay here for a while, so we've had a lot of fun together, and probably continue having a lot of fun.
Well, Larson talking a little bit there about, chemistry with Vince Dunn coming back to Seattle. And yes, he did ask Vince to take the post down. But ultimately, I do think that keeping Larson and Dunn together can definitely be an addition early on in the season. What I always hope for the Seattle Kraken, though, is that we know when to be nimble. And I don't know. I haven't seen the guys on the ice yet. We will do that on Thursday. But I think there is a world in which maybe, we find a better use case for those guys. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I want to take a look at what we have on the defensive end. Where is Riker going to fit in? What's the right balance there? Things of that nature. But let's definitely put a pin in that one. Another thing, though, that I've been talking about, that I think a lot of people are talking about regarding the Seattle Kraken, is the salary cap. Now, Adam Larsson's contract extension will not tap into the well this year. It will start next year. So Larsson's contract is not something that we have to worry about right now. But with just a little over $4,000 left, what was Ron Francis's reaction to if there will be any additional moves? He did talk about that, so we're going to talk about it again because we've already talked about it. But I want you to hear from Ron Francis, and then I'll give you my thoughts as we go into training camp and when, if at all, we might see the Seattle Kraken decide to make some moves just to free up some cap space. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. We appreciate you being we appreciate you making us your first listen of the day. If you're looking for something else to listen to, go check out Locked On NHL. And don't forget, on Friday, we have our women's hockey spotlight. I will once again be joining Rachel and Gil to give you the updates on the PWHL and other things women's hockey adjacent. I know we had some comments on YouTube regarding what's going on with Seattle and the PWHL. Well, go head over to our YouTube channel if you want to know my thoughts on that. And of course, make sure you stay locked on NHL and our women's hockey spotlight. We hopefully have some plans to expand that to a longer segment and a full show. But for right now, you can find me on Locked On NHL every other Friday, giving you the women's hockey spotlight. Okay, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to take us to Ron Francis talking about the salary cap situation. Now, we've talked about this before. I just want to remind you, let's take a look over at Puckpedia. Right now, the projected cap space is $286. So let's head over to what Ron Francis had to say about the salary cap situation when he was asked. This is the same day that that Adam Larsson and Matty Beniers talked to media about their respective extensions.
I don't know, we got $4,327 left, so not more left to figure out. So not much sleep for Ricky Olczyk this year, but yeah, no, we certainly look at that. If we have 21 players, we're tight up against it. So do we look at doing something to alleviate that a little bit? But at the same time, you don't want to just do something to make your team weaker. So we'll constantly look at that and monitor that. There's a couple of situations that we're a little concerned about as we get into the season, but we'll have those discussions with Dan and make sure he's aware of what may or may not transpire and kind of go from there.
So sounds like to me, we definitely could see something. And this goes back to a conversation that we had off of something I heard on the Kraken radio network with Mike Benton and Everett Fitzhugh, friend of the podcast. Everett was saying that he didn't expect the Seattle Kraken to do much more, and they didn't, in free agency outside of the Beniers extension and then Larsson that will again tap in next year. But what he did say is, and maybe I'm adding this because I think it's true, and I've said it before, that maybe it's a short leash early on for the Seattle Kraken, and they keep that wiggle room. You said that there's something, and you heard, Ron say that there are some things that they have flagged. And so if those things aren't going the way they want, maybe if they see something that's advantageous, they make a move, and they can do that by offloading a player that is on the roster. I do think also that at least part of this is, how do these maybe quote unquote more bubble players, especially veterans that have cap hit this year, how do they approach training camp? And what is the long-term, short-term, intermediate vision for players maybe like a Brandon Tanev? We've talked about Yanni Gourde. I think considering the center situation, Yanni Gourde could be a different conversation. But, what are we going to see? And then the real answer is we just don't know yet, which is why I'm so excited to get to the first training camp session, main camp, all the big boys around. Derek says he's got the rookies and prospects ready to go. So this should be a competitive camp. It should be a fast camp. There should be a lot of training involved, at least if we see Dan doing some of what Derek has done in rookie camp. I'm excited, and we will be there live and with a special announcement that we should have coming up really soon. Locked On Insiders, take a look, because you'll probably get a first look at some of the new things that we'll have here at Locked On Kraken. But as always, be kind to yourself, be kind to one another, hold fast, stay true. And tomorrow and Thursday at Kraken Community Icebucks, we can all say together, loud and proud, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.